Snow clung stubbornly to the boughs of the heart tree, though summer still held the north by its threadbare sleeve. In the God's Wood at Winterfell, the world was old and close and green. The air smelled of damp earth and cold water, and the carved face in the weirwood watched as if it had always watched. Jon Snow stood beneath that red-eyed gaze with the chill of the pool on his skin. The whisper of leaves circling him like a prayer he did not know how to answer. He heard the great yard beyond the wall and the sound of pipes and laughter. Stranger sounds, bright and jangling. The king had come. Ghost shifted soundlessly at Jon's heel, white as drifted snow. Pink eyes fixed upon the gate with an intensity that made Jon lay a hand on his fur. "Easy," he said, and the direwolf's head turned toward him, then back to the gate. The others had flown like shaken leaves to feast and stare, to drink in the sight of King Robert like a tale come walking. Jon had come instead to the God's Wood. It was where he went when the hall was too loud, when the looks Catelyn gave him rubbed the skin raw behind his ribs. The crunch of boot on old leaf and damp path drew him from his thoughts. He would have known the measured stride even if Ghost hadn't nudged him in warning. Lord Eddard Stark carried quiet about him like a cloak. He came to stand beside Jon without looking at him, eyes on the heart tree, sword at his side, snow in his dark hair where the drifted flakes had not melted. For a time, the two of them said nothing, and the eyes in the heart tree watched. "Ned," Jon said at last, though in his heart he named him father. "Jon." Ned Stark's voice held no rebuke, no chill. He was as he always was in this place, grave as the face in the tree. "The king has come with all his roar and thunder." Later he said, more softly, "I know where you go when the hall grows too crowded." "Ghost likes it here," Jon said, because that was easier than saying the rest. Ned's mouth twitched at one corner. "He is a quiet beast, for a direwolf. He listens." "I do as well." Jon dared a glance at his father's face. The lines there had grown more fixed these last days. It was in the set of his mouth, the tired stoop of his shoulders when he thought no one watched. "You do not look happy, father." "The old gods do not forbid me to speak plain in their sight," Ned said. He watched the reddened eyes of the tree for a moment longer and then faced Jon fully. "Robert will ask a thing of me I would not wish to grant. He will ask me to be hand of the king. I swore him my sword long ago. He will call on it now, and the honor will be no honor." Jon swallowed. He had heard whispers at the feast, men's voices under ale. "The wolf goes to the south to sit by the stag. You will say yes." "I think I must." Ned turned his gaze toward the thin fall of leaves, the way they danced on the skin of the pool and drifted down with a faint, wet kiss. "There is venom in King's Landing cloaked in silk. Jon Arryn is dead. Lisa writes that lions prowl the council chamber with velvet on their paws. Robert is no longer young, and he does not listen to the voices that would keep him from tumbling. I must try." Jon's chest felt too tight for his ribs. "Then Robb will be lord in truth while you are gone." "Yes." Ned dipped a hand in the pool, splashed water over his fingers, and shook it free. "He will have need of me, even from afar, as will the north." His eyes came back to Jon. A seriousness like winter filled them. "I will have need of you." It was as if the carved face itself had cracked to speak. Jon stared. "Me? I mean to take you south with me," Ned said, and the words fell like something hard and real at Jon's feet. "Not as my servant nor as a hostage in a gilded cage. As my son. You will remember that, no matter what men in bright silk say." The heart tree whispered. Jon could only look at him. "South." A knot that had lived under his breastbone for years uncurled, cautious and tender as new growth. To King's Landing? He had dreamed of the South as one dreams of distant stars one will never touch. "But, Catelyn, my lady wife will be angered." Ned did not flinch from the truth. "She is not to blame for it. The world has given her little cause to love what the world calls bastard. But she is not ruler of me, nor of what I must do for the good of this house. I will speak to her." He drew a breath that seemed to pain him. "I mean to ask the king to grant your legitimization." Jon's heart stumbled. He could taste iron. Legitim, to make you Jon Stark. Ned's voice deepened. I will ask it. I cannot swear the answer he will give. The thought, the sound alone, was so big it cast new shadows in the old wood. Jon's hands had trembled before battle, before the blunt and ordinary cruelty of Ser Roderick's stout stick, before the cold stare of Catelyn Tully when he had crossed her path unthinkingly near the solar. But he had never trembled to hear a name. He imagined letters carved in oak. Jon Stark. He imagined the banners in the great hall on a feast day, a wolf on field of gray. He imagined his mother's face and reached for it and found only fog. His throat closed. Look at me, Ned said. Jon did. There will be venom. The gilded south stings with 1,000 little teeth. I would not take you to that nest lightly, but I will be hand and I will have no ally I trust so well as my own blood. Robb will hold the north. He will need to learn to be lord here, under Maester Luwin and Ser Roderick and my lady. You will be by my right hand in King's Landing. You will see men and masks and the machinery with which kingdoms are steered. You will learn it. You will learn them. And you will be ready when the north calls, and it will call, to answer with more than a sword. Jon found his voice. I will do whatever you ask, he said, and it felt not enough and too much all at once. If the king will. He did not dare the word again. I will ask him, Ned said. I ask because a man who has called me brother should grant me this mercy, and because it is just. Then Ned's voice softened. I ask because I can no longer bear to see you under my roof and not under my name. The words struck him like a blow of warmth. Jon blinked against sudden heat in his eyes. He closed them so that he would not weep before the heart tree or before his father, and the carved face watched with its patient grief. When he had mastered himself, Ned said, Go to Mikken at once and ask him to finish the work I sent him last week. Jon frowned. The work? A sword. Ned's mouth shaped a shadow of a smile. Thin, light, and sharp. A needle for a fierce little girl. My daughters will come south, and one of them at least is better taught by steel than song. A grin broke from Jon in surprise. Arya, he said. Arya, Ned agreed. They stood together a moment longer while the boughs shifted, while Ghost drew incense and let them out through his nose like fog. The king's bugles keened in the far yard, and the heart tree shed a leaf that fell into the pool and bled red into the water. When Jon left the Godswood, Ghost moved like his shadow. The yard was loud as a smithy and bright with strangers. Men-at-arms in stag emblems jostled the Winterfell men. Hounds slithered between boots, horses stamped. Tyrion Lannister, small and fox-eyed, stood like a trick of the light upon the stone steps, studying the yard as if it were a board for some game no one else could see. He had been north to stare at the wall and returned with the royal party, his mouth full of barbs and scents. Now his mismatched gaze cut to Jon. Tyrion lifted his cup in a sly salute as if he saw every secret as plain as a banner and permitted them all. Jon, who had spoken with the Lannister dwarf at feast and found there a mind like quicksilver, returned the nod and moved on. Inside Mikken's forge the world shrank to fire and bellows. The smith glanced up, sweat tracking black runnels down his sooty cheeks. Aye, just in time. He ducked under his bench and drew forth a long bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. Ghost sniffed it and sneezed. As the Lord ordered. Jon took the bundle as if it were some newborn thing. He unwrapped the cloth and the steel within came to him with a whisper. Thin as truth, light as breath. The blade lay bright across his hands. The crossguard was plain, the hilt wrapped in leather dark as night. He lifted it and held it before him, and it seemed to belong in his grip. He thought of Arya's quick hands and gray eyes and the way she sat a horse like a boy, hair strings flung into her face and laughter flying after. He thought of Sansa too, how her face would close like a door when Arya ran wild. With that he tried to imagine her with a sword and could not. He smiled in spite of himself. For the little one, Mikken grunted. Lord's orders say it goes to you to give. Jon nodded, the weight of the news in his chest, the thin keen of blade in his hand. My thanks. That night the king drank until his laughter boomed under the beams and men roared louder for the sound of it. Jon watched Robert Baratheon from his place below the salt, saw the way the years rode the king like a heavy rider. In his mind he had always been tall as a tower and handsome as a summer morning. The man at the dais was thick and flushed, his beard streaked with iron. But when he slapped Ned on the back and shouted for a song, when the light hit him just right, Jon glimpsed that Stormlord who had broken a crowned stag on the Trident and loved a girl whose memory haunted Ned Stark's eyes. Catelyn Stark kept her face set above the rise and fall of talk, a lady carved of pale maple beside her lord. When her gaze fell on Jon, it slid off as if he were a shadow in the rushes. Jon felt the old ache of it, and he bore it as he had learned to bear it. He would never be where she could look without wincing. In the stable later, when the hall had spilled its heat and drunkards into the cold, Jon found Arya by her gray pony, telling her secrets as if hearing them aloud would set them true. "Close your eyes," Jon said. Arya squinted one eye at him, then obeyed with exaggerated seriousness. He laid the blade across her two outstretched hands. "Don't drop it." Arya's eyes flew open and filled his world with starlight. "Is it mine?" He was never one to hoard joy. "If you can keep it from Sansa, I'll hide it in the clothes chest," she whispered, immediately plotting. "Or up in the rafters. Or, oh Jon, it's beautiful." "A needle," Jon said. "You always hated the big clumsy ones." Arya laughed, a sound like wind and bells. "Needle?" she repeated, tasting it as if it were honey. "I will practice in secret," she confided. "They will not stop me." "They won't, not if you keep it secret well." He caught her gaze. "And you will learn to use it as it should be used. A man comes from Bravos with the royal party. I heard Ser Alan speak of him. A Bravo something. Perhaps he can teach." "Bravosi?" Arya breathed, as if the word held spells. "Like water dancers. I will be a water dancer." "You'll be Arya Stark," Jon said. "That is more than enough." She flung her arms around his neck, too old for it by some lights, and clung. "I wish you would not go with father," she mumbled into the wool of his jerkin. "But if you do, I am glad to go with you." "Then that is good," Jon said, and the words were too small for the feeling that rose in him like a tide. Catelyn did not sleep that night, or if she did, she slept with eyes open. When Ned told her in the solar the next morning that Jon would go south as his son, the sound that escaped her was a blade drawn slow along a stone. "As your son he has been these many years." The words were flat. "And as your son he will be where I must not look. You will shame our trueborn son." "My trueborn son will sit Winterfell's high seat," Ned said. "There was iron in him here, iron old as the north. Robb will need to be Robb, not follow my shadow. Jon will be where I need him. The king will be asked to name what is already fact. He will make Jon Stark." "You will name a bastard to our house," Catelyn said, softly enough that the softness itself cut. "To Lord Hoster's house, to our children's house." "I will name my son to my name," Ned replied. "And that is an end to it." There were words after that which no servants repeated, and which Jon never learned. He only knew that when he passed her in the corridor she looked straight through him as if he were a trick of the light and then away, as one looks from a wound one cannot bind. He bore it because he had no choice and because Ned had said, "You will be my son in truth." They rode out in the next days in a procession long as a river. The king's banners snapped under the pale sun. The queen's gilded carriage glittered. The princes rode with guards like petals around a flower that had thorns for scent. The north breathed over them its slow mist as if the land itself were reluctant to release them. Jon took his place with the Stark men, Ghost loping silent beside his horse. Sansa sat straight and sweet on her palfrey, eyes wider than he had seen them, full of songs she had memorized at night. Arya sulked one morning and then remembered her new blade and rode with an air that told any fool who could read that she had a secret. Ned wore silence like a helm. On the King's Road south, the world widened. They passed the white of old birches and the tatter of oaks, the smell of river water and wild mint, the far shoulders of hills that the south called mountains. Jon moved through it with the sense that a door had opened and the world beyond did not match his mother's stories because he had none of those to begin with. Tyrion Lannister found him one evening at the camp's edge, strangely companionable for a man Jon had been taught to mistrust. "You look like a boy who has swallowed a songbird," Tyrion said, taking his place upon a stump as if it had been reserved for him. "One that fell warm into your hand and allowed itself to be held. Either that or you are counting all the ways this path leads to your own unmaking. Must it?" Jon asked, and he felt vaguely foolish to ask such a thing of a Lannister. "I will be what my father asks me to be." That is an answer the old gods likely approve. Tyrion's smile was quick and crooked. Men, however, men are fickle gods. The South does not keep your father's kind well. It preserves cunning in jars of gold and burns honor for light. "You paint it black," Jon said. "I paint it as it is seen by eyes lower to the ground than yours." Tyrion reached up to scratch Ghost between the ears without hesitation. Ghost tolerated him with surprise. "It is an interesting proposal, though, your father's decision. Does the king know what he is asked to do for you?" "Not yet." Jon made himself meet the dwarf's gaze. "But he will. Robert owes your father a dozen lifetimes," Tyrion mused, and his eyes went far for a heartbeat. "He may think he pays off a piece of it in your favor." His gaze flicked toward the royal pavilion where the king's laughter rose in a wave and fell again. "Others will have their opinions." "The queen," Jon said. "The queen, certainly." Tyrion made a face as if he had bitten an unripe fruit. "Her notion of blood is thin as the water that runs in her city. She will not desire a bastard's legitimization, even if he is no bastard in truth or in heart. And then there are the, what shall we call them, creatures of the council." Jon listened because he had learned to listen to any man who spoke without wasting words. "If I am named Stark, I do not take anything from anyone." Tyrion tilted his head. "No, you take attention. You take space at a table where each seat is a claim to the air some other man breathes. You take the fear of men who had expected to contend with only one Stark youth in the years to come. Fear makes a sly companion." He smiled with something like kindness. "Take care of yourself, Lord Snow. Or shall I say, Lord Stark?" "Jon," Jon said. "If you mean to wish me well, say my name." "So I shall, Jon." Tyrion slid from his stump. "The world is cruel to us both, but sometimes it grows bored and forgets to bite. On those days, drink good wine." He winked. "On the other days, drink better." It was 2 days later when the world remembered its teeth. They had stopped where willows grew fat and the road bent toward a narrow stream. Joffrey Baratheon rode with his chin high and his mouth twisted off and on in an idle smirk, flanked by Sandor Clegane on his monstrous courser and a pair of Lannister men. Sansa watched him as if watching a flame, drawn and dazzled. Arya, bored and wild, had taken her practice blade and Micah the butcher's boy to the stream to play at nights. Jon had watched all this with an unease that crawled up his spine and urged him to shadow. He found them on a spit of wet stones. Arya's hair stuck to her cheeks. Micah's nose ran. Both were laughing, blades of willow sticks clacking. Ghost prowled at Jon's side, head low. He had learned to know the shape of trouble in his wolf's muzzle. When the prince came like a bright spear, it happened as quickly as snow sliding from a roof. Joffrey's words were honey and vinegar. His gaze went from Jon to Arya as if deciding which provocation to taste first. He chose the smallest. He took Micah's stick from his hands and cut the boy across the face with it so that the blood sprang. "How dare you?" he said, delight feathering his voice. "Strike me, little pig boy. I didn't." Micah began, and Arya moved like a cat, her practiced sword leaping. Joffrey swung back, and Jon had Ghost moving, had his hand on the prince's wrist in the next breath. "Enough!" Sandor's mare stamped, iron on stone, the hound's scarred face twisting into something between a laugh and a snarl. "You lay hands on the prince, wolf bastard? Your prince is playing at being a man with a boy's blood," Jon said, and felt the cold in his voice. The bruise of his father's promise lay new in him. "Care rides the road with you," His fingers loosened on Joffrey's wrist but did not fall away. "Leave off." For a moment Joffrey looked at him as if he were a thing that had spoken out of turn. Then he saw Ghost, and the knowledge of teeth crawled like a new idea across the prince's face. He jerked his wrist free. "This is not done," he said, high and cold. "You will pay for this insolence." "Insolence is a bitter fruit," Jon said. "Eat it often and you will learn to love its taste." Later there would be shouting, the queen's pale fury, Sansa's tears. Later Lady would die for sins that were not hers. Later Arya would vanish to her father's tent and shut her mouth like a coffer and not weep in front of anyone. Jon walked away with a bitter in his own mouth that would not wash out. He sat near the fire that night with Ghost at his feet and thought of the price of being south, and it smelled like burnt fur and felt like iron. King's Landing rose from the horizon like a ragged crown. The closer they came, the more it stank, of people and heat and old stone soaked in too many spilled things. The city walls loomed like old teeth. Beyond them, the Red Keep perched like a hawk. Sails pricked the blue of the Blackwater, and the air tasted of salt. Jon rode through the gate half sick with the mix of fear and strange excitement that pressed his skin. Ned's face went stiller with every step. In the yard of the Red Keep, stable boys swarmed like ants. The queen descended in gold, light on her hair, poison on her tongue. Varys glided from shadow to throne room with the skill of a silkworm making thread. Peter Baelish smiled a smile that invited confidences and meant to se. Allel them. Grand Maester Pycelle drooled wisdom on his beard. Renly Baratheon dazzled with easy charm he wore like a cloak. The small council gathered like carrion crows. Jon stood a step behind his father and watched men who moved a kingdom with words and money set their feet for a new dance. The king named Ned his hand. The iron badge lay cold on Ned's breast. That night the city celebrated with a tourney men called a mercy and others called a waste. Jon went to the yard at daybreak, drawn by habit to the sound of steel. He watched nights sweat in bright sun and thought of winter's practice yard, of Ser Roderick's grunted corrections, of Robb's bark of laughter. His own hands itched for a blade. He took turns with the Stark men. He beat some, was beaten by others, learned the yard's angles. The hound watched once, blank as a burned wall. When Jon looked, the man looked back with eyes pale as old ice. "You have more wolf than most," Sandor said at last. "Keep your teeth sheathed until you can bite." "I have no wish to bite you," Jon said. Sandor's mouth skinned back. "You'll not get the chance." Syrio Farrell arrived as if conjured by Arya's need. A small man with a bald head and eyes like sunlit water, hired in secret by Ned to turn a girl's stubbornness into grace. Jon watched one lesson from a doorway, unseen, and his throat tightened with pride as Arya moved like light. There were not many unalloyed joys in King's Landing. This one he stored as if the winter ahead were long and he could spend it in lean times. Ned began his work. He pored over ledgers and asked questions no one wanted asked. The book he brought to bed like an old lover, the lineages and histories of the great houses, became a prayer. Its list of marriages and hair and eyes told him a truth the South did not want to know. Jon saw the change in him, how he made a choice and took it like a brand. He would tell the queen what he knew. He would warn her like a man who lived by a rule. "You must be ready," Ned told Jon at last in the small, dim hours, candlelight carving his tired face. "There will be fright, and then there will be brass. It will not last." He set down his cup. "I will not tell you everything. Not yet. But know this. Whatever you hear, whatever they tell you about me or about yourself, remember who you are. Remember where you were made." "I remember," Jon said. "Good." He rose. "Tomorrow I will speak with Robert about you." The king received him, heavy in his hunting leathers, smell of drink and boar grease clinging like perfume. When Ned spoke, Robert's laughter died. He rubbed his face. "Make the boy a Stark? What is that to me? You want it, I give it. Anything for you, Ned. He's a fine lad. I have 5 bastards and I'd make each of them kings if I could." He laughed again then, clapping Ned's shoulder so hard the badge of hand clicked against bone. "Cersei will spit venom. Let her." I will give you this, and then I will ride and kill a boar and forget I am king for a day." And so it was done. The king signed the parchment with a hand that shook faintly. The words looked like a dream to Jon when Ned put them into his hands hours later. That Robert Baratheon, king, did declare the boy born in Eddard Stark's house to be thereafter and forevermore Jon Stark, of Winterfell, legitimate son of Eddard of House Stark. Jon stared until the letters blurred, until the lines wounded him with their beauty. He could not speak. Ned's fingers were gentle on his shoulder. "You will be called for oath in the Godswood when next we return," he said. "For now, keep this close and do not speak of it to any man you do not trust to die for you." The knowledge was a fire in Jon's chest. It warmed him and singed him both. He tucked the parchment into a hidden pocket, and for days after, when he feared he might wake to find it a dream, he touched it lightly to be sure. Cersei's fury came like a silent winter storm. She smiled with teeth and sent her brother to smile with steel. Jaime Lannister met Jon in the yard one afternoon under a sky bleached by sun. The Golden Man's eyes danced as if laughter lived behind them. "So, the wolf's bastard who is no longer bastard." His sword lay easy in his hand as if it were an extra bone. "Come, boy, show me what the North makes." Jon measured the weight of his own blade, kept his breath steady. Ser Jaime moved like music, and Jon moved like a man who had learned to listen. They circled. Steel kissed steel. The clash ran along his bones and hummed in his teeth. He did not win. He did not disgrace himself. In the end, Jaime disarmed him like a man plucking a flower. "Good," the Kingslayer said, breath calm. "You'll live long enough to learn more." "I intend to," Jon said. Jaime's grin flickered. "Not all who intend to do." He turned and went, cloak bright as new coin. There was more work in the shadows than in the sun. Varys came like a draft through doors that had seemed shut. "My Lord Stark," he said once to Jon in a passage where even ghosts' feet did not sound. "The city changes men. The trick is to change with it only as much as you must." His smile was not kind and not unkind. "Your father's honor towers. Towers are wonderful to look at and dreadful to live in. Remember to use the stairs." "Speak plainly," Jon said, too tired to chase riddles. "I have," Varys said, and the riddle was that he may not have lied. Littlefinger offered friendship as one offers dice. "If you wish to practice sums," he told Jon over a dish of candied lemon, "practice them where it matters. Coin flows, lordling. Slip your hand under and press just so, and you can change its course. Nothing teaches men's hearts like the counting of their florins." "My father teaches me other lessons," Jon said. "I see that," Baelish answered with a cut of his smile. "Let us hope they do not kill you when it comes to the point. Honor is such a beautiful shroud." The tourney filled the city's eyes with dust and color. Jon watched the Knight of Flowers tilt against men twice his strength and unhorse them with grace. He watched Ser Gregor Clegane lose his temper and try to kill Loras on the sand. He watched Sandor step in with fire in his face and shame his brother. He watched the king laugh and then frown and drink and not notice that the city was a tinderbox. He watched and he learned the faces of men when they watched blood. In the forge of Tobomot, Jon found a boy with eyes wide as a deer's and hair black as a raven's wing laboring at a breastplate. "That curve is wrong," Jon said before he thought. The boy looked up as if caught stealing. "Master says it's right. Master knows more than I." Jon flexed his palm where the leather of his glove had softened to the boy's trade. "I have only worn them, but it will slip the shoulder." The boy tried it and saw. His mouth quirked. "Gendry," he said into the quiet between them. "Jon," Jon said. They worked in an awkward camaraderie for a quarter hour, the clang and hiss of the forge speaking their pieces for them. When Jon left, sweat ran down his spine and the boy looked as if he had won a victory no one would note. Jon walked back through the street, ghosting, thinking of black hair and blue eyes and the way the book in Ned's study spoke of trueborn Baratheons. The street of steel gave way to softer streets where silk clung to girls' hips and men laughed as if life were a trick they had remembered. Jon returned to the Red Keep with every sense tightened. The city rubbed him raw. The keep polished him where he did not notice. Every word was either sharp or sweet. He learned to taste each before swallowing. He learned the names of the gold cloaks who could be trusted and those who could be bought twice in an afternoon. Janos Slynt smiled too much with his mouth and not at all with his eyes. The letter from Lord Stannis came like ice. He had fled to Dragonstone. The realm whispered. He sent letters to so many lords that Ned received his from 3 different hands. Each said the same. The king's heirs were not the king's blood. The queen was a traitor. The truth shivered in the marrow of the city like a fever. Ned went to the queen in the garden where bees muttered drunk on blossoms. Jon was not with him. He knew only that his father returned with a face that had bent and had not broken. "It is done," Ned said to the heir, to himself, to the gods who had followed him this far. "She will run. She will save her children if she has any sense left in her." He said nothing of the tremor in his own hand when he poured wine. The king rode to hunt, heavy and flushed. Ned put a paper before him to sign that named him regent should the worst happen, and the worst happened because the worst loves to be invited. When they brought Robert back, his belly torn, his laughter loud because pain requires an audience to humble it, he gripped Ned's hand and said, "You were always my better. Take care of them." He died and the city leaned. Jon stood in the dark by his door and felt the tremor run through the stone. This is the part in songs where honor and paper hold. The song forgot Janos Slynt's toothy smile. The song forgot gold. The city watch turned their cloaks when Ned called on their blades. Peter's promise made a hollow sound. The throne room that day was all cold light and breath. Cersei tore Robert's paper in half, and the sound was like a skin of ice breaking. Ned told her he had sent for Lord Stannis to claim what was his. "You may save your children," he said, and it was the last mercy he was allowed. The Lannister men came, the gold cloaks with them. Jon had a sword in his hand and Ghost at his knee. Jory was dead already. That wound wept anew. Alan's face brightened, then fixed and went flat, a man deciding the manner of his dying. "Stay close," he told Jon. And Jon stayed because he meant to live and because he would not leave his father. The clash began like a storm bursting. Steel on steel, the scream of men whose lungs were new to the taste of blood. Janos Slynt's voice carried, "In the king's name, in the king's name." Jon spat and cut a man who lunged for Ned. Ghost hit another in the thigh, worry and fury in his jaws. The throne behind Cersei looked like a thing made of old hunger. It watched and did not move. Ser Meryn Trant came like iron with a face. Ser Barristan looked sorrowful and did what duty asked. The hound stood by Joffrey with boredom in his mouth and calculation in his eyes. Littlefinger watched with his smile held on. In the end, it was no book, no song, no fair thing. A man in a gold cloak clubbed Jon across the back with the flat of his halberd, and another kicked his knee, and he went down with a breath that felt like breaking. He saw boots and the bars of the throne between his lashes. He heard someone crying and did not know his own voice. He heard Sansa's name and Arya's and his father's voice speaking to him as if from the bottom of a well. Live, live, live. They dragged him to a cell that smelled of iron and urine. Varys came later like fog. "Shoo," he said. "It is not wise to cry." He pressed water to Jon's mouth. "Your father is alive for the moment. He may die well or ill. I am a little man with a little power and a larger fear. I will do what I can and pretend it is enough." He looked at Jon over the candle's gut of light. "If you wish to leave this place, listen very closely." "You mean to sell me?" Jon said, and the words hurt his mouth. "I mean to exchange you," Varys said. "Value is what men agree it is. The girl Arya is lost. The girl Sansa is a flower in the queen's hand. The queen will not see the value in either of them as what they are. She will see the value in what they could buy. A wolf's son is a hostage of a certain kind. More importantly, a dead wolf's son is a message. I do not like the way messages smell." "Don't ye?" Jon asked. "You smell like the north and like your father. It is not so bad a scent." Varys leaned in. "Tonight a man will come and cut that lock. He will smell like a stable and you will not like him. You will go with him and not ask questions. You will go out through a door that smells like river. You will not look back. You will not try to find your father. You will not do any brave thing. My father, Jon said. I cannot leave him. You can, because if you do not, then you will be killed and the weight of your death will break him before any sword could. Varys said in a tone that stripped away the soft. I have saved men by telling them how they must break their own hearts. It is a talent I would throw in the river if I could. But I cannot. Why? Jon asked. Why do you do this? Because the game is not finished, Varys said. Because there are worse kings than a boy who believes he is a god. Because men like your father keep a balance that is quickly overturned. Because once, long ago, someone did not save me and I learned the shape of that loss and I cannot bear to see it repeated endlessly before my eyes. He sighed. You will take the road north. The wall will have eyes for you. If the gods are kind, you will reach your brother. If they are cruel, and they are many things, you will become a story men tell about how high the waves were that year. The lock clicked later as promised. Yoren of the Night's Watch, lean as a stripped branch, scowled into Jon's face. Quickly, boy. He stuffed a filthy hood over Jon's head. I owe your Uncle Benjen as many favors as a man can owe and not be broke. Curse the city. Come. Ghost came to them out of blackness. Yoren hissed in amazement but did not waste breath. They moved through intestines of stone, under the red keep, through damp places where the walls sweated. Jon kept his breath quiet and his feet careful. His knee hurt and his back felt as if it had been beaten by men who had enjoyed it, which they had. He did not look back. The river swallowed them with its damp tongue. They went out in a riverboat that smelled of old fish and fear, hunched under bundles of straw and rags. The walls of the city slid by like a waking dream. In the bundle beside him, a small hard shape breathed. Arya, feral, silent. She did not speak and he did not call her name. Some vows do not require words. Yoren took them to a road and set them on it with a company of rough boys bound for the wall and rougher men who would accompany them in chains. You too, Yoren said, scratching at his beard as if to keep his hands from their faces. Are mice. Keep your whiskers down. I'm not a mouse, Arya said to Jon when Yoren was gone. I'm a wolf. In the dusty dawn she looked like both. I lost Needle. You will have it again, Jon said, though he did not know if it was true. They traveled as dust flies. The King's Road has a way of eating those who think they do not belong to it. It wore them down and kept them going. Arya fought with boys twice her size and won because she did not care what losing meant. Jon learned the hard virtue of keeping one's head lower than one's pride. Ghost was their shadow. Men kept away from them because of the shape of his teeth. Nights came with stars like points pricked in a velvet lid. Days passed and the crows followed. Behind them the city burned in rumor. Ahead of them the north opened like a hand. They were not the only wolves on the road. The Riverlands were full of rumor and smoke. The Lannisters burned and took and laughed over the ashes. Catelyn Stark caught a dwarf in an inn because grief has a logic that looks like madness at a distance. The small man had not cut Bran's throat, but the insult was enough to start a bonfire that found dry brush everywhere. The great Jon bellowed and men in boiled leather knelt to Robb Stark and called him Lord. War shifted onto the map like a long shadow. Jon and Arya overheard the world deciding to break. At the Trident, Yoren peeled off with the convicts and the Green Boy recruits. No further for you, he told the two wolves, and he said it like the prayer he might use when he crossed himself before the heart tree down in the shadow of the wall. If the gods love you at all, your path will be your own. I thought to take the black once, Jon said, and it was a confession that tasted like a goodbye to the boy he had almost been. Keep a bit of the black in you, Yoren said. For the cold that always comes, give the rest to your brother. He gripped Jon's forearm hard enough to bruise, nodded to Arya, and went. Men like him always go. There is always some duty that draws them on like a lodestone. The North reached down to collect its lost things. One night in a copse of poplars, they were surrounded by silent men with wolves on their surcoats, their breath ghosting in the cool. Ghost showed his teeth and then went still, muzzle lifting. "Halt," one of the men said. "In whose name do you travel?" "In my father's," Jon said, straightening. "In the name of Eddard of House Stark." "Your father is dead," the man said bluntly. The world paused. Jon felt the pause. The way leaves hold, breath held. When a hawk's shadow passes. He heard Arya's breath like a knife on stone. "Say that again," she said, and there was something in her voice that made the men around them reevaluate her size. "Joffrey cut his head off," another said, and then flinched as if from his own words. "In the Great September," he shifted. "I'm sorry, Jon did not fall. He did not speak. The pause passed and the leaves moved and the men reached for him as if he might run into the dark, and they must keep him because someone had told them he mattered. "Your brother has called the banners," the first man went on, as if giving a rope to a man who had fallen into a well. "He marches south. He will want you." "What of Sansa?" Arya demanded, voice like a blade found in a river, bright and nicked. "What of my sister?" "Taken," the man said, "in the hands of the queen." "No," Arya whispered, and Ghost made a sound that was sad and murderous all at once. "They rode with the Stark men, not as mice but as wolves found again by their pack. They came into Robb's camp at nightfall 2 days later under a thin moon. The air smelled of horses and broth and leather, and of the thing that lives in war camps that is not quite fear or hunger. Men came to the edges of fires to see the shape of them." Jon dismounted to find Robb striding toward him with his hair rough from his helmet and a line between his brows Jon had never seen when they had tumbled together as boys. "Jon," Robb said, and then it was his brother's mouth and his brother's arms, and Jon could breathe again. "Robb," Jon said, and let himself be held as if that alone would fix the world. Arya stood a pace away, arms knotted, Ghost at her side. Robb's eyes found her, softened, broke, remade. "Sister," he said. "Thank the gods." He did not ask where Sansa was. His eyes knew. Later, when the tent was emptied of everyone but those who had a right to be there by blood or by choice, Catelyn came. She looked like a woman who had put her beauty away because she had no time to wear it. She did not touch Jon. She touched Arya's hair with hands that shook once and then steadied. "We thought you lost," she said. "I was busy learning," Arya said, as if that explained everything. Catelyn's eyes moved to Jon at last and stopped, and something happened in them that might have been defeat, might have been recognition, might have been simply exhaustion. "You brought my daughter back to me," she said, every word labor. "For that I thank you." "I did not do it alone," Jon said, because he could not take a gift and pretend it was not made by other hands. She inclined her head. That was all. It was more than she had ever given him. The council that night was hard and hot, full of men's voices and maps. The great Jon pounded his fist. Roose Bolton said nothing and said much with the shape of his mouth. The Blackfish's eyes were keen and made of river iron. Robb looked younger and older by turns, and when his eyes fell on Jon, they rested there for a heartbeat as if drawing strength. "We must cross," Robb said. His finger traced the blue serpent of the Green Fork. "Tywin holds the south. Jaime hunts in the west. If we go south around, we will be ground between them. Lord Frey," someone began, and the name gave the tent a sour smell. "Lord Frey will do what Lord Frey does," Catelyn said. "He will count. He will weigh. He will ask for more than we would give any honest man. We may give it to him and curse ourselves later." She looked at her son and not at anyone else. "Do what you must to get the men across." They went to the twins and made the bargain that would later taste of blood. Jon kept his mouth shut and his eyes open. He watched the old weasel in the high chair with his pale brood around him and thought, "Here is a man who has outlived his honor like an old coat, who keeps it in a chest to show on feast days." He listened to Catelyn pay with her voice and Robb pay with his word. He touched the parchment in his coat, the king's proclamation, as if it were a talisman. Its comfort was thin and sharp. They crossed. They broke into two, as water divides around a rock. Jon rode with Robb and the greater part of the northern strength, and the long grass whipped at their legs like fingers. They came at last to a wood where the river spoke low and urgent, and the Lannister camp lay dozing on the far bank like a drunk in the sun. The trap at the Whispering Wood was a song some sang loud and others left to memory. Jon did not sing. He crouched, heart steady for the first time since he had left the dark of the Red Keep. Ghost pressed against his knee, and the men around him moved in the green with no more noise than a wind. When the horn blew, Jon's sword was out and his voice went with the voice of the North, a sound men afterward swore they had never heard before. Grey wind came like a storm thrown into fur. Men fell. Jaime Lannister shone even in shadow. He cut men as if slicing fruit. Jon met him as if some will had decided the thing. Steel kissed and quarreled again. Jaime laughed once in surprise. Again, wolf boy? Stark, Jon said, and tasted the word like blood. Remember it. Easily done. Jaime turned to cut and slid, slippery as light. The fight broke around them and Jon's world narrowed to blade and breath. He did not beat the Kingslayer. He helped to capture him. The net the North threw had bigger weights than Jon's blade. Tywin took him from behind. The great Jon clapped a hand the size of a ham on Jaime's shoulder. The bright man yielded with a smile that looked like he kept a jest just for himself. In the aftermath, the men roared and counted the living and the dead. Robb stood among them with a smear of blood across his cheek and eyes that had seen their first men die by his order. He found Jon in the noise and embraced him with both arms. "We did it," he said, half wonder, half grief. "We did," Jon said. At dawn they called a council of a different sort. The lords of the North and Riverlands crowded Robb's tent. The air smelled of sweat and smoke and wet wool. The Blackfish stood at his nephew's back, the great Jon in front, his chest like a forge. They argued over kings. Renly had declared himself on the roses. Stannis had declared himself on the rock. The boy on the Iron Throne had declared himself a god. "In all the world there is none I would place my sword behind," the great Jon thundered, "save the man whose blood I have followed here. Why should we look to a Southron king we did not choose? Why should we kneel to men who burn our lands and chain our kin? Why should we not choose our own?" The words went around the tent like a fire in dry grass. "Nispent." Voices rose. The cry that was born then had something of the North's old ice in it, something of a very ancient memory. They named Robb king in the North, and the sound of it made Jon's skin crawl in a good way, in a holy way. He went to his knee with the rest, and when his head bowed it was not because another man's had. It was because something older than he was in his marrow commanded it. He knelt not to a boy he had tumbled with, not to a brother alone. He knelt to the North that had made them both and watched them both and expected them both to hold. Afterward, when the tent cleared and the night came through the seams like a cold breath, Robb took Jon's arm and held it as if he were a man adrift clinging to a log. "Will you?" he began and then stopped. You were fathers." He struggled with the words as if with a stubborn horse and then laughed, short and pained. "I meant to say, shall you return to Winterfell when this is done and rule in my stead? As my heir?" He swallowed. "If the worst, you will not speak of your death to me as coin to be counted," Jon said, the old stubbornness of Ned's voice in his mouth. "You will not. I will not take a gift done in grief. I am your man, Robb. Live or die, I am your man. I will be what you need." "I need you to be Jon," Robb said roughly. "Not a memory of father in another face. Not a piece of paper in a king's hand. I will be Jon," Jon said. "That is the best I can do." They laughed together then, and the sound scoured something clean. There was no end to be plucked from the road in those days. The war went on because wars do. Catelyn rode south to treat with the lions because there was a sliver of hope hammered so thin a woman might think it wide. Sansa remained a flower in a thorned hand. Arya's needle showed up again in her fist as if it had never been lost, and no one asked the question too loudly of how. Jon drilled men and rode with scouts and learned to read Roose Bolton's silences. He learned the smell of the Frey's smiles. He kept the king's paper where he could reach it with his hand and with his thoughts, but did not take it out more often than it was safe to do so. He dreamed of a red door he had never seen and woke with the taste of salt on his tongue, and a name he did not know how to say. News came as it always does, in fluttering shreds tied to birds' legs. Daenerys Stormborn crossed the red waste with dragons in the mouths of men who wanted to scare each other into sleeping with swords. Stannis burned the false gods of the south on the beach at Dragonstone and drew a sword from the belly of the night. Renly laughed and gathered banners with a smile that made men think of summer. In the far, far north, beyond even what the Night's Watch had words for, things moved that were not men. Jon listened because he had learned to listen not only to the nearest threat but to the edge of the sky. One evening as autumn stretched its fingers into the leaves, a boy with the look of a frog about the eyes slipped into the Stark camp and asked for Jon by name. He was not stopped because the guards had been told to expect no one like him, and because when a thing is meant to happen, men help it without knowing. "My Lord Jon," the boy said, and his hair fell into his eyes and his hands were thin as reeds. "I have a message from a man who remembers you, though you have never seen him." "Who?" Jon asked, already feeling the ground tilt slightly under his boots. "Howland Reed," the boy said, and the tent seemed to pull a breath to make room for the name. Of Greywater Watch. Jon had never seen Howland Reed. He knew the name from the quiet places of his father's past. He had thought of the Crannogman as one thinks of the wind that carries your ship downstream. You know the name because sailors do. He led the boy to Robb as was right and to Catelyn when she was fetched, and the boy told a story in a low voice of a promise made under a red sky in a tower that never had a good name. "I was sent," he said, eyes on the floor, "to tell Lord Eddard's son if the time came when the truth would save more than it would kill. I do not know if this is that time. I only know that you must choose if it is." "What truth?" Catelyn demanded, and Jon felt rather than heard the hum of the knife in her voice. "The truth of his birth," the boy said, and looked at Jon for the first time as if he could see the shape of the thing under his skin. "Of his mother and father. Of the price your lord paid to keep a promise to a sister." It was as if the heart tree had risen in the tent, white bark and bleeding eyes. For a long time no one moved or breathed. Jon's hand went to his chest without his bidding, to the pocket where the king's words slept. "Say it," he said. The boy drew a breath like a swimmer going under. Lyanna Stark bore a son in a tower at the edge of the world and asked her brother to protect him. He swore it. He swore it by all the gods old and new. He kept that oath with a lie and with his honor and with the bed he shared with the lady who sits in this tent. He brought the boy to Winterfell and called him bastard. He hid his blood to keep him from a king who would have killed him. "Your name," he said, and his voice did not tremble though his hands did, "is not your only name." Catelyn made a sound with no word in it. Robb sat down because that was what his knees told him to do. Jon did not do either. He stood as if a man had laid a sword across his shoulders and he must bear it or be cut. "Whose son am I?" "Your father is who you have thought him in the ways that matter," the boy said, and Jon would have hit him if he had any strength left. "And also not. You are the son of Lyanna Stark." He swallowed. "And Rhaegar Targaryen." The tent narrowed and then widened and then turned. Jon thought he might be sick. There were too many years between the day and this one for a man to find all the pieces at once. He reached, and his hand closed on the fold of the tent and held. He did not fall. "No," Catelyn said softly, as if refusing a dish at a table. "No." Robb's eyes were wet and angry. "This is some ploy," he said. "Some trick of the South to break us." "The South does not send me," the boy said. "Greywater moves where the South cannot find it. Lord Howland sends me because he must, because he swore to Ned Stark to play this piece when it would win him more than it cost him." "What does it win?" Catelyn asked, her voice hoarse. "What does telling this now win? A bastard made king of ashes? A dragon laid on a wolf's hearth? It breaks my children's house. It makes whole what was broken," the boy said, and that was when Jon realized the lad was brave. "Or it makes a different breaking, one that will not give a tyrant a sword and a cause together. If the lion pardons himself, and if the stag eats itself, what stands that does not burn?" The North. Perhaps the North with a dragon's claim that is not a dragon's cruelty. Jon wanted to say no. He wanted to spit on the ground and say, I am Jon Stark. I am Northern. I am what my father named me. He opened his mouth to say that, and another thing came out instead. What proof? The boy pulled a bundle of old cloth from under his tunic and unwrapped it with care that made Jon's skin crawl. Inside lay a thing like dead bone. A maiden's garland long turned brittle, a scrap of cloth with the dire wolf sewn to a dragon three-headed and red. And two words written in a hand Jon knew only from seeing it in the margins of Maester Luwin's papers and the old ledgers at Winterfell. The ink had browned. Promise me. Enough, Catelyn said, and her hands had steadied. Enough. She looked at Jon not as if he were a wound, not now, but as if he were some weapon she must examine before deciding whether to wield it. If this is true, she said, then we live in a different world than we did this morning. It does not change my knee, Jon said, and he knew that was what he had of himself to give. Robb is my king. I am his man. I will not be a banner for strangers to rally behind. I will not be a story men tell to justify their treasons. You may not have the choice, Catelyn said, pity in her eyes that he could not bear. I make it now, Jon said. He looked at Robb and saw the old sun on the snow at last, the boy with the wooden sword, the lord with a real one. Hear me. Robb stood and put his hands on Jon's shoulders. He looked into Jon's face and maybe saw his father there, and maybe saw a stranger, and maybe saw only the boy he had loved and the man he needed. I hear you, he said. Brother. The word steadied Jon like a hand at his back. He drew breath. In the night beyond the tent, the men of the North stamped and laughed, sharpened blades and told stories of their dead. The world had peeled back like bark. The tree within was the same old tree. In the days that followed, men began to look at Jon differently. Some looked with awe that made Jon want to strike them to make it stop. Some looked with fear. Some with speculation, as men look at a sum and try to read the answer. Roose Bolton's eyes were knives on him. The Karstarks a cold well. The Manderleys eyed him as if he were fish they had not eaten in a long time. The Fry boys, those without mouths full of lies, looked at him openly. His mother's name, and he thought of her now as mother because it seemed some wrong to call her otherwise, walked ahead of him like a blessing or a curse depending on who heard it. Jon learned to carry that as he had carried other weights. He wore Stark on his tongue because he had worn it long before the king wrote it on a paper. He said little and did the work that lay before him. When he slept, he dreamed sometimes of the Tower of Joy, though he had never seen it, and sometimes of a woman's voice singing to him in a tongue his waking mind did not know. He dreamed of a red door. He dreamed of snow falling in a city of red stone and of ghosts standing at the edge of the world with eyes like coals. Do you believe it? Arya asked one morning when the camp was washed with gray light and her hair was a tangle she did not care to tame. She said it as if she were asking if the weather would turn wet. I don't know what I believe, Jon answered, and laughed once to hear the truth out loud. I know who I am. Then the rest is their problem, she said with Arya's brute wisdom. She rubbed her nose. I will stab anyone who makes it mine. He smiled. Try not to stab anyone we need. I will make careful choices, she said solemnly, and they both laughed. Word from the south turned like milk left in sun. Renly died with a shadow on his throat. Stannis broke on the walls of King's Landing with wildfire on the river and a lion's roar in his ear. Tywin rode as if he had been born on a horse, pulled the realm behind him with ropes of coin and fear. Robb moved like a wolf along his edges, cutting and slipping. He married where he had promised not to, or promised not well enough at least, and the world began to connive with that. Jon watched the lines on the maps and the lines on his brother's face and did what a good man does. He put his strength where it might turn the wheel one more time. When they returned to Winterfell between campaigns, when the tall stones took them back into their shadow, Jon went at once to the Godswood. The heart tree stood as it had stood. The pool knew only to take whatever the sky gave it and mirror it faithfully back. Jon knelt. Ghost lay beside him with his long muzzle on his paws. The wind moved in the leaves and made the old sound, and Jon felt on his cheeks what might have been rain and might have been something else. "I'm trying," he told the tree, and the mother whose face he did not know, and the father whose face he knew too well, and the brother who had become a king. "I'm trying to be the man I was asked to be." The leaves answered like a low chorus. Behind him Robb came and knelt too, and their two shadows were one long shape on the grass. "We will be what we can," Robb said, and there was no crown in his voice then, only the boy and the man. "We will be what the North needs." They rose and went out of the wood together. The day was sharp and thin. The yard rang with steel. Somewhere inside the keep, Sansa's voice was remembered and Arya's laugh was a blade, and Bran's dreams grew green under snow, and Rickon had run too far and would be found. Catelyn counted the names of her children and did not say them aloud. The ravens wheeled over the towers, black scribbles against the pale sky, and somewhere beyond the world a thing with cold fingers turned and sniffed the air. The wolves of Winterfell moved, and the trees watched, and the old gods made no sound but that of leaves. In King's Landing, a queen in a red dress set a candle and watched it weep. In the east, a girl with a dragon's name and 3 small dragons in her heart opened her hand and found fire. On the wall, a horn sounded once, and men looked south and north and did not know yet which way they would need to run. Jon remembered Tyrion's counsel about wine and chose to drink water. He remembered Varys's riddles and chose to sharpen steel. He remembered Ned's voice and chose to live so that it would not go quiet in him. Not all choices were his, and not all his choices would hold. The road ahead held a bridge with a toll unseen, set by old men with 1,000 children and not enough names. It held a hall full of bread and salt and songs that would turn to knives. It held a rebuilding after a breaking and breaking after a rebuilding, which is what time does to all that men make. In all of that, Jon kept walking with the thing that had been put in his hands and could not be taken back without tearing his fingers. He held it with care when care served and with stubbornness when it did not. He had been raised as a lord's heir in a city that hated him for his father and his name. He had learned men and masks and the machinery of kingdoms. He was a Stark, however the world tried to call him otherwise. And the North remembered. When winter's first true breath sluiced down from the wall and the rivers woke stiff and slow under ice, Jon stood on the battlements of Winterfell and watched men bring in the last of the barley. The snow that clung to the heart tree clung also to his hair now, and he did not brush it off. Ghost's white lay beside the white of the ledge, his eyes pale stones. Robb came to lean beside him, quiet in his furs, and together they looked north where the sky was a lid, and south where the road threaded the world, and did not speak. They did not have to. In this, at last, they had grown into their father's silence. Below, in the yard, Arya crossed swords with a boy a head taller and drove him back 3 steps before Sirio's laugh cracked the air, thin and delighted, and she corrected her foot and flowed like water. Catelyn stood at the solar window with a letter in her hand and closed her eyes against the sting of it, then opened them because she could not help always taking the next step. Somewhere, a raven found its proper wind and committed itself to the journey. "You remember when we fought with sticks?" Robb said, voice fogging. "I remember everything," Jon said, "and it was not a boast but a grief and a gift both." Robb nodded. "Keep the North for me when I am gone." "You will come back," Jon said, because he believed it when he said it, and because even if he did not, he had learned that sometimes one must set truth like a flag on a hill and make the world march around it. "I will try," Robb said, and smiled a winter smile. They stood in their father's house and in their father's winter and in their own, and the wind told no secrets and the trees kept counsel and the old gods watched. If some blood in Jon's veins ran south and east with a song of bells and fire, he did not deny it and did not offer it. He let it be. He had been taken south and raised up within the walls of a city of lies, and there he had learned to put truth in his mouth and keep some of it behind his teeth. He carried the knowledge of men who turn cloaks and men who burn cities to save thrones, of boys who think themselves gods, and of the small kindnesses that keep one man alive long enough to do one more good thing. In the end, it might be that none of it would be enough, not a wolf's blood, nor a dragon's name, nor a king's paper, nor any number of swords. The cold did not care for papers. The dead did not turn aside for banners. But men live in the small space between their wanting and what the world allows, and in that space they choose and choose again, and sometimes, with the choosing, make something that lasts a little longer than they do. Jon reached down and buried his fingers in Ghost's ruff. The direwolf looked up and blinked once and put his head in Jon's palm. In the yard, Arya's blade flashed and stopped. She bowed with a fierce joy. In the Riverlands far south, a marriage was planned with songs and knives both on the menu. In the east, a dragon stretched small wings and tested the air. On the wall, a horn sounded again. Once, twice, and then, after a long ache of silence, a third time, and men looked at one another with old stories on their tongues. "Come, Ghost," Jon said, and turned from the wall. There was work to do. There was always work to do. The North had called, and he had answered, and he would keep answering until some other voice, older, colder, spoke from under the ice. He could hear it now, very faint, like the far moan of wind through dead branches. He straightened his shoulders and went down toward the yard where the rest of his life waited, sharp and real as winter.